All right, now, in all the universe, as far as I know, there's this principle. The nature of the seed determines the nature of that which is produced by the seed. For instance, you plant an orange pip, you don't expect to get an apple. You plant an apple pip, you don't expect to get a banana. The seed determines the nature. So, if we are born again of incorruptible seed, what kind of nature do we get? An incorruptible nature. That's the nature of the new man. Now, listen, I am not telling you that a born-again Christian cannot sin. I'd have to rule myself out if I told you that. What I'm telling you is, in every truly born-again Christian, there is a nature which is incapable of sinning. It's the nature of Jesus, and it's born of the incorruptible seed of the Word of God, and nothing can ever corrupt it. Now, the kind of life we live will be determined by the interplay of two natures, the old man and the new man. The new man cannot sin. The old man cannot help sinning. So, in order to live a life of victory, we have to accept the biblical pattern of dealing with the old man, which is crucifixion, execution. But it's not enough just once to reckon yourself dead. If you turn to Colossians chapter 3, Paul makes it clear it's an ongoing process. In fact, I would say, perhaps I'm unspiritual, but in me, it's an ongoing battle. I mean, maybe some of you are so blessed of God that you have no struggle, but not true of me. Looking now in Colossians chapter 3, if then you were raised with Christ, seek those things which are above, where Christ is, sitting at the right hand of God. Paul has been teaching both in Ephesians and Colossians, we are identified with Jesus Christ in death, burial, resurrection, and ascension. So he says, if we've ascended with Christ, why keep your nose down to the earth? Set your mind on things above, not on things on the earth. For you died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. Isn't that a wonderful statement? You died. When did you die? When Jesus died on the cross. You died. You say, well, where is my life now? Paul says, you've got a secret hidden life that the world doesn't understand. It's hidden with Christ in God. What could ever be more secure than that? With Christ in God. Then he goes on, when Christ, who is our life, appears. Brothers and sisters, everything you need is in that one statement. Christ is our life. Victory over sin, healing from sickness, power over the devil. It's all in that one statement. It's an unfathomable mind. Christ is our life. And so simple. But then he goes on to say, when Christ, who is our life, appears, then you also will appear with him in glory. Then the world will really see what you're like. Meanwhile, it's hidden. The world can't see it. Now then, verse 5, therefore, put to death your members which are on the earth. Fornication, uncleanness, passion, evil desires, and covetousness, which is idolatry. You see, the Bible is very realistic. It says, all right, you died when Jesus died on the cross. But be sure to keep yourself dead. All right? So he says, mortify, put to death, keep dead. You understand that? So that's, I believe, God's provision for victory over sin. And I'd have to say lots of born-again Christians really don't have ongoing victory over sin. They're continually struggling up and down. One day they have the victory, the next day they don't. I think in most cases it's because they haven't seen God's provision made through the cross. Let's go back to Romans 6, verse 6 for a moment. Knowing this. Now, from now on, I trust every one of you do know it. All right? You do know it. I mean, if I were to take a poll, I think some of you would have to say, honestly, I really never knew it before. But now I do know it. Knowing this, that our old man was crucified with him, that the body of sin might be done away with. You notice the body of sin, that's another word for this thing in us that's always motivated to sin. Might be, what does it say, done away with. It's very hard to find a good translation for that word. I would say, put out of action. It doesn't cease to exist. There is some holiness teaching that teaches that the old man has ceased to exist. Well, who's doing his job? That's my question. It just doesn't answer to experience. One thing about theology, it has to work in experience. Otherwise, it's not much use. All right. The body of sin might be done away with, that we should no longer be slaves of sin. That's the ultimate purpose, to escape from the slavery of sin. And that is only when we recognize that our old man was crucified with him. Merely having our past sins forgiven is tremendous, but it does not deal with the slavery of sin. See what I'm saying? All right, now, let's first of all do what we've done all the time and apply that. All right? We'll do first of all our and then mine. I've got to think how we put this in words. I'll say it first myself. Our old man was put to death that the new man might live in us. Does that make sense? Might come to life in us, I think is better. All right? Our old man was put to death that the new man might come to life in us. Do that once more. Our old man was put to death that the new man might come to life in us. Now, you've got to change it. You know the change, don't you? My old man was put to death that the new man might come to life in me. That's wonderful. Now, let me just, reading from the outline, not taxing my memory too much, let me list the 10 aspects of the exchange which we have looked at. And I would like to suggest, if you want an assignment, that you memorize these 10 aspects, if possible in this order. The order isn't sacred, but it does help in a way to end up with the old man. And then, when you've done that, memorize the related scriptures. Not learn the scriptures by heart, but learn the references of the passages that substantiate what's been stated. Now, that's not altogether easy for some of you, but I honestly guarantee you that if you'll do that, you'll be a different person at the end of it. All right, I will just go through the exchange. I won't ask you to join me right now. I'll do it in front of you. I'll do left hand and right hand the way we have, okay? Jesus was punished that we might be forgiven. Jesus was wounded that we might be healed. Jesus was made sin with our sinfulness that we might be made righteous with his righteousness. Jesus died our death that we might share his life. Jesus was made a curse that we might receive the blessing. Jesus endured our poverty that we might share his abundance. Jesus bore our shame that we might share his glory. Jesus endured our rejection that we might have his acceptance with the Father. Jesus was cut off by death that we might be joined to God eternally. And finally, our old man was put to death in him that the new man might come to life in us. Now I want to say there is one very important biblical word which describes all of that. and it is the word salvation. Many, many times we have a very narrow and incomplete picture of what salvation is. My definition of salvation is it's everything that's been obtained for us by the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross. And it includes every area of our lives: spiritual, mental, emotional, physical, material, financial, temporal, and eternal. Now, let's look at just a few places where we see some of the breadth of the word salvation. Turn first of all to Psalm 78. I want to start in the Old Testament. You'll find that Psalm 78, some of the modern versions, where the King James says salvation, will use the word victory or success. The reason is that it's a very broad word. It includes victory. It includes success. It includes prosperity. But really, I think the best word to stick with is salvation. So, we read in Psalm 78, verses 21 and 22, and this is speaking about the experience of Israel on their way through the wilderness to the promised land. Therefore the Lord heard this and was furious. He heard what they were saying. It's important to remember that the Lord hears what we say. So a fire was kindled against Jacob, and his anger also came up against Israel, because they did not believe in God and did not trust his salvation. It's very important to see that it makes God angry when we don't believe in him and when we don't trust his salvation. Now, what is meant by his salvation? The answer is, if you look at the whole context, everything that God did for them from the time that they sacrificed the Passover lamb in Egypt onwards, everything is his salvation. If you'd like to look at just a little in the same psalm, going back to verse 12, marvelous things God did in the sight of their fathers in the land of Egypt, in the field of Zoan. He divided the sea and caused them to pass through. And he made the waters stand up like a heap. In the daytime also he led them with a cloud, and all the night with a light of fire. He split the rocks in the wilderness and gave them drink in abundance like the depths. I wonder whether you've ever grasped the fact that they didn't just get a little trickle in the desert. They got deep pools of water. He also brought streams out of the rock and caused waters to run down like rivers. Then it says they didn't trust his salvation. In other words, they didn't trust the total provision of God that they had witnessed. And then it says a little further on in that psalm, in verse 41, yes, again and again they tempted God and limited the Holy One of Israel. What a descriptive phrase, to limit the Holy One of Israel. In other words, they set limits as to how much they would believe God would do for them. Is that true of the church? Have we limited God with our concept of salvation? I would say we have done it no less than Israel did in the Old Testament. You see, there's a lot of emphasis today on being born again. And I thank God for it in a way, but I think sometimes it's a very shallow, superficial kind of statement. And when I hear some of the people who say they've been born again and observe the way they live, I just wonder how much it's really worth. But I want to say this: being born again is an experience of a unique importance. Unless you're born again, you cannot see or enter the kingdom of God. But it's a one-time experience. Salvation is an ongoing process. See, that's what we haven't grasped. Part of salvation is being baptized. I don't want to be controversial, but you can be born again without being baptized. But if you want to be saved, whosoever believeth and is one baptized shall be saved. It's part of the process. I want to take now a whole series of passages from the New Testament where the New Testament writers use the word save. The Greek word to save, I save, is very simple. Sozo. that letter is pronounced like a DZ, sozo. If you want it in Greek, for once in a way, we'll give it to you. All right, my Greek writing is not the best, but anyhow. Now, that word is probably translated save 80% of the time. But it means a lot more than just getting your soul ready to heaven. Somebody said the evangelical concept of salvation is to get souls prepackaged for heaven. Well, salvation includes a lot more than being prepackaged for heaven. And I just want to give you a whole series of New Testament passages where this word save is used. It's this word in every place. And it'll give you a little concept of what is included in salvation. We have the list there. We start with Matthew 14 and verse 36. And we only need to read the latter part of the verse. This speaks about the ministry of Jesus to the sick. And it says, as many as touched his garment were made perfectly well, or perfectly whole. Now that is the verb sozo, but it's got a preposition in front. That's the Greek preposition, which means throughly or thoroughly. So to be thoroughly saved is to be perfectly healed, you see. It's not talking solely about the condition of their souls. It's talking about the sick. And as many as touched him were totally saved. How many of you have total salvation? You have salvation, but how total is it? All right, let's go on. Mark chapter 10, verses 51 and 52. This is the blind man on the road to Jericho. Verse 51, Jesus answered and said to him, what do you want me to do for you? The blind man said to him, Rabboni, that I may receive my sight. He had a one-track mind. All he wanted was to get his sight, and he got it. Then Jesus said to him, go your way. Your faith, in this version says, has made you well. And immediately he received his sight, followed him in the way. The Greek is, your faith has saved you. That's salvation. Luke 8:36. I don't know how about you, but I feel better as I go through these scriptures. They're doing me good. If I'm the only one that's getting blessed, at least I'm getting blessed. Luke 8:36. Now this is the story of the Gadarene demoniac. You remember the man who had a legion of demons, who wouldn't wear clothes, who was out in the tombs cutting himself and screaming night and day. And then Jesus drove the demons out of him. This is what happened. The crowds came, and in verse 36, the people who'd witnessed it explained. They also who had seen it told them by what means he who had been demon-possessed was healed. But the Greek word is saved. So salvation includes deliverance from demons. And then in the same chapter, verses 47 and 48, this is with the woman with the issue of blood who came behind him and touched him and then didn't want to be recognized. Do you know why she didn't want to be recognized? Do you understand that? Because according to Jewish law, a woman with an issue of blood was unclean and was not free to touch anybody. See? That's why she was embarrassed. Now when the woman saw that she was not hidden, she came trembling and falling down before him. She declared to him in the presence of all the people the reason she had touched him and how she was healed immediately. But the Greek word is saved. And Jesus said to her, daughter, be of good cheer. Your faith has made you well, has saved you. Wonderful. And then verse 50, here comes the man this is concerning Jairus, the elder in the synagogue, whose daughter was dying, and a messenger comes and said, don't trouble the master, your daughter is dead. But in verse 50, when Jesus heard it, he answered him saying, do not be afraid, only believe, she will be made well. But what does it say? It says she will be saved. So in that one chapter, salvation includes deliverance from demons, healing of an issue of blood, and raising from the dead. That's what I call total salvation. And it's all been purchased by one sacrifice. You see, I've told people you can be a child of God and live like a beggar. If you don't make friends with the keeper of the storehouse, then let him use the key. Because the key is the cross. All right, Acts 4:9. We're running out of time, but we'll make it by the grace of God. How many of you believe that the same God that turned the sun back can slow the hands of that clock? Acts chapter 4 and verse 9. This is the lame man at the beautiful gate. Peter and John are being questioned about this. They said, if we this day are judged for a good deed done to the helpless man, by what means he has been made well? But Peter said, he has been saved. And then he said in verse 12, nor is there salvation in any other, for there is no other name under heaven given among men by which we must be saved. The same word, you understand? It's just a word, and then a word that suits every context. And then Acts 14, verses 8 through 10. This is Paul preaching in Lystra. And in Lystra, a certain man without strength in his feet was sitting, a cripple from his mother's womb who had never walked. This man heard Paul speaking. Paul, observing him intently and seeing that he had faith to be healed, said with a loud voice, stand up straight on your feet. And he leapt and walked. Paul perceived that he had faith to be saved. That's right. See? All right, let's look at just two other scriptures in the New Testament. 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 18. In my opinion, 2 Timothy is one of the great pieces of literature in the world. It's just a masterpiece. But anyhow, 2 Timothy 4:18. Timothy describes the result of his first trial, and he says, the Lord will deliver me from every evil work and preserve me to his heavenly kingdom. To him be glory forever and ever. Preserve me is save me. So it's an ongoing process of keeping me from all evil. And finally, James 5:15 says, is any sick among you? Let him call for the elders of the church and let them anoint him with oil, praying over him. The prayer of faith shall do what to the sick? Save the sick. But he's not talking about forgiveness of sins. He's talking about healing. All right, so those are some New Testament examples of the use of the word to save. We'll continue with further thoughts on that in the next session.